So today it's about let's talk together and talking about those tips for early development. My name is Marijke Morris, so a very kind of foreign name. It's a Dutch name, Marijke actually, but nobody can say that, including hubby. And it was Saarfontein. So when I first moved to Ireland, it created a bit of chaos because they're like, Saarfontein, what is that? Where in South Africa, where I'm from, that's quite a typical name. And I married a Morris, so it made it so much easier. So I could just go Morris, just write Morris. It's fine. Anyway, so what we're going to talk about today is just who's cats and who we are, and then we're going to talk about speech and language development in 2 to 5 year olds. I'm going to walk you through the milestones, okay? And if there's at any point you want to ask me a question, just put up your hand and we'll ask as we go along. I will also take some questions at the end, and if you'd rather speak to me privately at the end, I'm going to hang around a little bit. The library closes at 8, so they want us out before then. So I'm planning on keeping the material up to about 7:30 and then giving us enough question time at the end there. Okay? So then we're going to talk about some strategies and tips, because sometimes you come across, we're not going to need that in developmental milestone, or I'd like to work on something, I think, because of maybe some risk factors that my child had at birth, or since maybe there was a lot of fluid in the middle ear, maybe because sometimes when kids teeth as well, there's lots of fluid going on, very, very common cause of speech sound disorders later on. So if that happens, it happened to my own as well, and if that happens, what do you do to kind of up it? Because it is possible to make a big difference just by doing a couple of really simple strategies. So the good news is it's really simple and easy to do. And then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about laying the foundations for reading and writing. If we don't get to it, it'll be an online course anyway. I'll record it afterwards, okay? It's just so we can get to all that. So I'm a speech and language therapist. And my son Bastian is sitting in the back entertaining himself. He has the pros and cons of having a mom who's a speech and language therapist. Okay, firstly, you get access to lots of toys, right? And there's lots of talking. But the cons is there's lots of photo shoots, which he's often involved in. And the last one is some video footage where we were showing how to do modeling and things like that. And then the negative part was there's also lots of talking. The talking can be a really good thing or a not so good thing. And somebody really always listening to what speech sounds you're making and how you're making it. So it's tricky. CAT is a private practice, and I first founded CAT about 10 years ago, and we have speech and language therapists on our team, and our base is in Clondalkin and Enterprise Park. And then we have a couple of satellite clinics as well. We won the prize last year for Best Speech and Language Therapy Practice, which is lovely because those speech therapists are really stars, they're wonderful. But really what comes down to today is really about your child. Right, so that's really what we want to focus on about it. So firstly, something that speech therapists always talk about is we need to think about what is communication. And when I qualified way back when, I qualified with a speech and language degree and an audiology degree, and they called it communication pathology, and I thought it sounds like you dissect newspapers, isn't it? They first had like logopedics, which nobody knew what that was, right? But being a speech and language therapist, actually what we're really about is communication. So that communication pathology was actually more on brand, because I'm often asked, oh, you work with kids who stutter, right? Or you work with S's and R's, right? Where there's a lot more going on in speech and language than that. With young kids, yes, we look at something like understanding, so the understanding of language. Sure, we look at what concepts the child understands, what directions they can follow, those kind of things. And then we'll also look at expressively what's their talking like, how are they constructing together. So we know that our 2-year-olds are now starting to put 2 words together. So how are they doing that, and are they doing it? And are we seeing that they're on that right path towards it? And a lot of kids with different special needs have difficulties in those areas. But when we also look at speech sounds, which is just a small part of it, right? And then when they make those errors, because all kids make speech sound errors, right? No child jumps out of the womb and goes, "Thank you, mother, for all the effort you made," perfectly pronounced with a slight accent, right? Apologies for the Terry. That doesn't happen, right? It takes a long time to develop those speech sounds. Speech is a really complex thing. We have to learn that over time. Then another part of it is fluency, like stuttering or cluttering, and I won't talk about it a huge amount, but we talk about that because there's also a typical phase where children get a bit disfluent because there's so much language that they're processing that they get a little bit stuck because they're thinking, right? So that we see sometimes happen, and then we need to, as a speech and language therapist, figure out, is this just typical dysfluency, or are we seeing some warning signs of stuttering? Because we need to get on that pretty fast in that case too. And then other difficulties a child might have would be voice. So mostly when it comes to kids, are those kids who shout a lot, and they end up shouting so much that they end up having nodules, okay? So nodules are like little calluses on the vocal cords. And then they might need surgery if that doesn't go away, okay? So we're talking about the guys who are really severe when it comes to that. In private practice, that doesn't come up very often. And overall, we have more common speech and language issues that come up than others. And what a speech and language therapist also works on would be kind of feeding and swallowing and food aversion and those kind of things as well. And all those pieces come together. But our main aim is to look at the child and how all those little bits of the puzzle fit together and where something might be a little bit tricky, and trying to think what would the reason for that difficulty be. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so just to break down communication a little bit more. So if we think about children hearing, attending, and listening to information that comes in, right? And then what they do is they put that information together so that they can understand. So that's the first part of the process. And then they use those words to share that meaning. And that's when we get to the expressive language or the talking. So if we say, what would be a typical thing that you would say to your kids all the time? Put that down. Get that out of your mouth. Right? Could be something like that. Okay? So put that down, or no, stop, that's dangerous. They need to hear the signal, figuring out what that means, see if they have any past experiences that they can draw against. And last time she said that, what happened? Okay? And it was the last time that happened, I hurt myself, so I better be careful. I got some experience again. And then to use those words to share meaning, okay? And very often you see kids starting to use your own sayings back at you, isn't it? I remember Bas saying to me before, my son used to say to me, "Mommy, look at my mouth." And I went, "Uh-oh, I've been overcorrecting," okay? So I thought, here we go, we got some difficulties here, then it's all my fault. And then with the expressive language we're talking, when you're putting together those ideas to talk about it, then it's how you sound, so how those speech sounds come together. So that's really what it is in a nutshell. So when we look into those little bits, the stuff that come up more often than not, which is speech and language difficulties, speech are really the sounds we use for talking. And as well as the sounds we use, it's influenced by fluency, like stuttering, okay, when we get a little bit stuck, or you go really, really fast and we really can't figure out, and nobody can understand what we're talking about, right? And then volume. We talk about kids using their outside voice versus their inside voice, yes? and starting to get used to using the right amount of volume. So when they're in maths, you know, and your kid goes, "Oh, she's got a fat belly," right? Inappropriate volume in the wrong setting, and you're like, "That's not my kid. It's not my kid." Right? And intonation stress is really important, because when you put stress on a different part of a sentence, you change their meaning. Okay? So when we say, "I'm going to go to school," you're going to go, "I'm going to go to school." "I'm going to school." "I'm going to school." Right? You can completely change the meaning by changing how you stress a word and how you're going to do that. And different languages have different meaning around how we use those sounds too. Okay, so that's something we want to keep in mind when we look at speech. Then we look at understanding. It's how kids understand not just the words, but also how words go together. What kind of words do you link up? English is actually quite a complex language to learn how to connect like that. And once you have that, you have to figure out how to use the correct grammar. Okay? So when we say, we go to the shop, right? So be able to know, we can say, "We went to the shop." So when is that an appropriate error? And when is that something just typically developing? That's what we need to look at. And then you need to be able to understand sentences and paragraphs and stories. So to be able to go to school, you need to be able to understand those things. And they often in junior infants talk about doing those retelling the stories and asking a lot of more complex questions, like, "Why do you think that happened?" And why is a really hard question for kids to do. Right? The easiest level, we call them the blank language level. Blank was an author. His name was Mr. Blank. So Blank originally said there were 4 different levels. One is where the understanding of basic things. What is that? Who is that? What color is it? Yeah. When it's more descriptive like that, show me the one that's big. Show me the one that's new. Yeah. And it gets a little bit more complicated. Phase 3 is where you're starting to sequence things. What happened first, what happened next, what happened last. And then your last level is the justifying and problem solving. Why did you break that? Why did we ask it? 2-year-olds. And they go, and it's because they go, "I don't know what why means." Because it happened? I don't know. I can't answer your question, you're asking too difficult a question. And say, "What are we going to do about it?" I don't know. You tell me, you're the grown-up, right? It's just too complex. But later on, kids can get to that level where they reason, they inference, they can do those really complex, higher level stuff that you see kids at 12 do. Okay, so what's really important, that understanding comes before use. There's one exception to that. Okay. When a kid is echolatic, so when they echo what they're saying, what you're saying, so they go, you say, "We're going to the shop." They'll go, "We're going to the shop." Okay? But a lot of their language is a little bit repetitive like that, and they're repeating it. Sometimes I had other kids coming in to me for speech and language therapy where they go, "Peppa's going to the moon." So it's delayed echolalia from something that they're repeating from a script, and that we usually see in kids on the autism spectrum. So there's that, but usually you have to be able to understand something before you can use it. Echolalia is not a bad thing. What it is just them thinking out loud and processing it out loud, and when they practice enough and people respond to it, they realize, "Oh, I can use this phrase." Right? So when people go, "Oh yes, Peppa went to the moon, here's the Peppa, and we're doing the characters," and then the next time they'll say that same thing. So it's not a horrible thing to do. Also, if I get €1 every time a parent comes in to me and say, "My child understands everything," my first question, what I'm really dying to ask is, if you compare your child to somebody else their age, do they understand just as much? And very often the answer is no, when you go and test it. And when I see kids with language disorders, their understanding is quite low. But I can understand as a parent, it's really hard to cope with that, because it seems like within the routine they do really well. Parents often say to me, "Oh, I tell him to put something in the bin and he does it," and I'm thinking, that's great. But when I ask him, "Show me the dog," he can't do that, because he hasn't been exposed to that in a different environment, hasn't practiced it. If we did that within the everyday routine, I bet you they're going to nail it, because routines, we practice things over and over and over. And part of our practical tips later on, we're going to use those everyday routines as a way of getting that repetition, because we don't have the time to sit down and do an hour of speech and language input every day. I don't. I can spend the time with somebody else's kids, but I can't do it with my own. Now the other part we were talking about is that expressive talking bit. So in order able to do that, you need to use words, you need to join those words together to make sentences, and you need to join them together and make sense. You can't just go table, chair, fun. Right? It needs to make sense with your meaning, and you need to start using those correct grammar for your age. Like past tense, word endings, those kind of things can be a little bit tricky. And if we think about where does speech and language development, if we think about looking at a whole child, that's what we need to do. And very often professionals go in, right, foot doctor, I'm going to look at the foot. I don't need a foot. We sometimes, as medical professionals and paramedical professionals, need to zoom out that lens a little bit and go, what's the bigger setting here? What else is going on? And is everything actually going really well? You know, and to be able to communicate that to you as well. So how do things like that link? If we think about speech and language and communication, it's really often described as that central skill that a lot of things revolve around. In order to be able to do some things, you need to have that. So imagine when you learn a new skill like riding a bike or driving a car, how much language was used to help teach you to develop that skill? If we think about driving, how did they just show you? Or was there a lot of talking around it?
There's a lot of talking.
And showing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you had to practice into it, but there's a lot of, when you do this, there's a lot of things, don't do that, right? But there's a huge amount of complex language around that. So in order to learn a skill, you need to be able to understand instructions, yeah? And then when people are trying a new or a difficult task, how often do you see them talking themselves through those steps? Oh, what is it I'm supposed to do here again? We see that when, I do that whenever there's a computer thing happening, right? Or maths. I have to talk myself through the maths. Sometimes I lie. My argument is, well, if you're good at languages, you're usually not good at maths. So if you're really good at maths, don't worry, you're not supposed to be good at languages. That's my excuse, not sticking to it, right? So it's that kind of skill level part of it as well. And then the other thing is, from a learning point of view, we really need it, right? And then if we think about social development, how would we make friends if we were only able to use 3 words? 3-word sentences. Hi, you. Happy to see you. You look lovely. How's the weather? You're very, very limited, and putting a lot of concept. Oh, how are you feeling? And it's usually quite long pieces. So it's really important to have that in order to develop those relationships. And when we think about that kind of emotional development, if, for example, if you're driving in a car and somebody does something really horrible, South Africans get a little bit more aggressive than Irish people, but I'm more than likely to be more upset. And if somebody aggravates you and you're not able to speak to them, what do you do?
Grunt.
You talk to yourself.
You can yeah. Sometimes you eat it. Did you just see what you did there? And we use a lot of non-verbal means too. Yeah. We know they're probably not going to see us, but you know. Where did you get your license? Buy it off the internet. You know, there's lots of those kind of things. I had one kid who he used to, when he didn't understand something, he went Poppy and Daisy, Poppy and Daisy, Poppy and Daisy, and it was an echolale form, and it's basically I'm going, I have no idea what you want me to do. And once the family do went, and he had no idea what he was saying, and the whole family were in stitches, but because they were responding, he said it again. So next time in therapy, he didn't go Poppy and Daisy. But I understood why he did that, and that's just way of, I don't know what you're saying. And he wasn't trying to be rude, so all we did was we just ignored it, and it did go away. But if you respond to it, of course. Yeah. And if we think about it from a behavior point of view, we really need our speech, language, and communication difficulties to tell that idiot what he's doing, right? And to be able to get a little bit of control back. I don't like what you're doing. Stop that, right? Because we can't hit people anymore. Maybe back in caveman days we could, but we can't really get away with that socially. So it's really kind of tricky. And if we think about what happens if you've done something well, or you've bought a new outfit and someone makes a comment but you don't know if they mean it, that's a tricky one as well. How do you figure out, based on the sentence, are they being sarcastic? How can we figure out? You need a lot of cognition around that. And children need language to learn. Research has shown us that learning has to be a social and an interactive process. And that really depends on a lot of language. You can do a lot of non-verbal stuff around that, but there's a lot of language you need to do around that too. And if we think about the behavior part of it, and how, especially 2-year-olds, how they struggle with their emotions and how that impacts on their behavior, it's really, they just need to know how to talk and listen to each other in order to make and keep those friends, right? Because in the beginning, they play next to each other. And now, you know, in their own egotistical little worlds, because that's how emotionally develop, you know, king of the hill, you know, you do it, right? That's perfectly okay. And over time, it's starting to impact on social, oh, so-and-so hit me, I don't want to be their friend anymore. Yeah? So how can we be nice to your friends, and how can we explain how to do that piece to it? And then your emotional development really depends on your ability to recognize your own feelings. So you need to have talked about those feelings, quite a bit of modeled it too. And you need to be able to label them for yourself. I'm really frustrated. Right? And you need to be able to understand how those feelings feel. But sometimes I can just see it bubbling up in their bodies, and they're like, I don't know what to do with all this things, and it's so big, you know, it's a broken banana, and I wanted a whole one. Yeah, something like that. Or the cookie is in bits, I don't eat that, but I'm not going to taste the same, right? And that's just a phase we all go through, and we go through it again as teenagers. With a bit more language, but this was still grunt, and we're still in our own egotistical little world, yeah? It's great, we have that to look forward to. So we really need to have adults who help us through those really upsetting times to explain to us what's happening there. And what I'm finding a lot, even in therapy sessions, the other day I had a mum and a dad in the session with me, and the child started crying. And we figured out, like, usually the crying is, I wanted you to do this, but you're not letting me. Today it was, you're not letting me tidy up. I wanted to finish this activity and tidy up. No, you don't want to do it? Ah, boy. Okay? And sometimes the parents go, don't cry. Stop crying. Don't be upset. Okay? So it's basically the don't worry, be happy. But if we make kids feel that negative emotions are not okay and you need to stop doing it, what's going to happen when they're teenagers? They're not going to talk to us about their negative feelings. And I find a lot of kids, oh no, I never get angry. No, I'm never sad, I'm always happy. And I'm like, maybe mum and dad need to do a little bit of modelling here about it's okay to be frustrated, it's okay to be angry. And I said to another kid today, it's okay to be bored. And I can see it's hard for you to wait, but you don't go over to your mum and kick her. You know, kicking is not nice. But what we can do is we can go punch a beanbag, right? So it's okay to feel those emotions, but how can we walk it through it? And that's something that we as parents can do all the time. So, what I wanted to check with you quickly before we jump into the milestones, okay, is I want to check what age did you meet these milestones, okay? So let's maybe think, what age did you get your first mobile phone?
Oh, I got about 20.
20? Did everybody get it at 20?
I think it was 17 or 18.
Okay, so there's already a little bit of a difference here. Anybody have kids with mobile phones now? Anybody know a 12-year-old with a mobile phone?
Yeah,
Yeah?
even 8.
Even 8? Okay. So,
In school they are allowed in.
yeah, I know I was 21. It wasn't like a break. Pull out the aerial, right? So there's already differences there, okay? So let's just think, how old were you when you first moved out of your parents' house? This is starting to get be a tricky one nowadays, isn't it? Don't worry, mine is quite late.
21.
Yourself?
21.
Yeah, where I was also 26. Okay, so if we think about it, there's no are we all the same?
We're not.
No. So all those milestones were quite different, and we won't get into the first kiss stuff, but you know. So it's really about, if we're not the same, kids are not the same, but we need to really be careful around this. Okay. Firstly, we do the same thing, different things at our own pace, yes, and everybody always says that, but we need to have it within a certain age range. And even sometimes speech and language therapists, when we look at our milestones, we don't necessarily realize that up to age 8 for an R means it includes the kids who had delays. So that means we need to start working the R a little bit sooner. That includes kids with delays. So no two children are the same, and I don't see them that way, but generally I want them to meet a general criteria where we're at, with where they need to be. So we want, some children might need a little bit more help than others. Some will catch up with that with a little bit of support, even just with parent support. But about 30% of kids with speech and language delays don't and will need intervention. So you don't want to run that gamble that your kid is in that 30%. And that's what I usually try and say to people, because very often I have a parent coming in to me when the kid's age 5 and say, I should have gone with my gut. Everybody told me it'll be fine. So-and-so was a family member and only spoke when he was 8. You know, so-and-so only spoke when they were 5. It's fine. It's not necessarily fine. And sometimes those guys, and the family members, if you dig a little bit deeper, you might find they had a diagnosis. Might not have been an identified one. But it's very, very dangerous to go with an, oh, it'll be grand. And even medical doctors do that. The kid's not talking by 4, that's bad. Okay? So, speech milestones. At age 2, okay, this is an interesting one. You need to be able to understand about 25 to 50% of what your child's of your child's speech. Okay? Because they very often go, and you're like, and usually mom knows, if you spend a lot of time with a kid, you translate it in your head and you know what kind of errors they make, and you can go, oh, you mean the koala is really nice. It's really interesting to see. Then at age 2 to 3, you should be able to understand about 75%. Okay, so you want to, they're going to have the sh sounds will be really hard, as well as consonant clusters, we call them. So like a gr, a br, a spr, a spla. Those, like splash is a really hard word to say. Okay, so we don't expect 2 to 3 year olds to nail something like windstorm. You know, that's not going to happen. Okay, it'll sound a little bit more like window, and that's a good stat on behalf of that. Age 3 to 4, you want about 75 to 100% of a child's speech to be completely intelligible. But so 75 more to age 3, the 100% more 4-year-olds. Okay, so when they go to school, we need to be able to understand most of what they're saying. So if you have any concerns about your child's speech, you need to really take note of what words your child has difficulty with. Because the first thing I always ask a parent is, so what kind of errors are you hearing? So that they don't say to me, spring is sping. And I'll be going, yeah, actually, that's a really hard word. Can you give me another example? So people are caught them up. It's the same as if mine says, okay, if you say to me what errors my child making, then I need to have it written down. So is it something like rabbit for rabbit? No, there's differences between a speech sound difficulty where kids can't say the R, right? That comes a little bit later anyway, and R's between like 5 to 7 ballpark, but you kind of need to start working on it at 6 really if it's not there, or at least there most of the time. Okay, so but sometimes kids have those typical phonological errors, we call them. So what's happening is they don't necessarily hear themselves making that error. So I have a discussion with a kid very often, and they go, oh yeah, and they look at a picture of a duck, and they go, oh yeah, that's a duck. And I'm like, a duck? Yes, a duck. Or you go, no, a duck. As if they don't realize that what they said wasn't duck. So for them, it's if they feel like they're saying it. And half of speech work is very often working on listening and kids tuning into how they're actually sounding. And very often when we video them and we play it back, they go, what? Is that what I sound like? So it's interesting to do that as a little experiment to see can they actually hear the differences. So when we move on to then language understanding, so those are our speech milestones, and there are different kind of errors that's still kind of typical, but we don't, if we just think about kind of a speech problem, a kid who age 3 doesn't say the end sounds of words, we need just to really start working on that. Even if it's a wrong ending sound. So just for juice or doot for juice is not enough. I at least want a doot for juice. So there's an ending sound, right? But age 2, we can give them leeway on that, yeah? Or if they shorten longer words like helicopter, heopter, or or nana for banana. That's shortening the syllables. Also, just something to add as a tip, always say the word correctly. That's a speechy thing. We always rig out when people say, oh yeah, that's the moo cow. I'm like, that's not a moo cow, it's a cow. You have to reteach the word all over again. Don't call it din-dins, it's dinner. Because it's teaching a child to use very immature language. Yes, you can interpret and go, moo, yes, the cow says moo, because they're not wrong. They'll say the word and it's really good. Good question. I'd never say no. I'll come to it when we talk about recasting, okay? But definitely I'd always say yes, because my example is usually if I say to you, so I'm originally Afrikaans speaking, my name is Adette Getaway, and if I say to you, I'm going to teach you the word peanut butter sandwich, okay? And I say, okay, groenpuntjie boter toebreekie. Right? Say it, right? Firstly, see why we should never say it? Right? How do you feel immediately? Pressure. And then I go, no, not that. You're going to leave or hit me, right? I'll give you a very dirty look at the very least, okay? Because that's not a good way of teaching, yes? And plus, they named the correct term, yes, so we give kudos for that. Even if they get the wrong word, I would sometimes go, if they say a rabbit is a cow, I go, cow? Cow? Oh, you mean rabbit.
Yeah.
So I won't go, no, that's not it, yeah? Kids get really freaked out, and then they get very sensitive to the word no then as well. If one kid goes and crying under the table whenever somebody uses the word no, and it's very hard to get them back out again. So when you're going to correct it, you're always going to say yes, and then you want the correct way of saying it. And I'll show you how to do that, so there's lots of repetitions with it, so you can get that. Okay, so understanding of language. So age 2 to 3, interestingly enough, identifies most body parts. A lot of kids I assessed who have severe speech and language difficulties can't do that. Show me mommy's head. Definitely not their own head. Easier on somebody else. No. Matches 3 to 4 colours, so at least matching, not naming. But if you say, ooh, where are the blue ones? You know, so put these to which ones can go together. Nose big and little, yeah, and then recognizes most objects when you name them. So when you name something, you go, oh yeah, I know that. Oh, there's a plane. Oh yeah, it's like, you know, I understand what a plane is. And your everyday objects. We're not talking about, you know, xylophone, unless you're a very musical family, you know, telescope. In some of our language tests we do that, we do it with kids who are much older. And then you want to, they need to understand what question, okay, what is that, yes, where is daddy, we often do that, right, why, so understand, sometimes they just go because, they might not be able to to answer it, but the why you're trying to get, like the who, the whose, so whose socks are these? Is that mummy's socks or daddy's socks, yeah? Understand what's your name and respond. How old are you? And they hold up their fingers. Now, they might not have the right number. 2, right? But as long as they have an idea, somebody asked you, how old are you? Now, sometimes some kids would have it in a different way, yes, because in Ireland we phrase things slightly different, so we go, what age are you? Yes. So sometimes I check with a parent what are the question that they use. Also with tummy and belly, I always check. What do they use at home, tummy or belly? And then those simple time concepts like last night, tomorrow. Okay? So you think a 2 to 3-year-old shouldn't understand it, but that time concept is important. And verbs like action words, kicking, rolling, jumping, swinging, pouring. Yeah? And then that concept of 1, so give me 1 block, give me all the blocks. So their maths concepts early start around that age 2 to 3. Then age 3 to 4, we get to a little bit more complex levels. So now they understand the time concepts like yesterday, tonight, okay? And here I would say, you see how much time concepts start pretty early on? And something like a schedule is pretty good. I'm going to show you an example of one later on we used with our own. To teach yesterday, tomorrow, because you know, you can go, oh yes, yesterday we went to the shop, but tomorrow, you see, we're going to the park. So it's so much easier when you can see it, because it's so an abstract concept to teach. Then following 3-part commands, okay? So put the block under the chair. So there's block, under, and chair. Okay, so there's those ones where a 2-year-old would need to do the 2 parts. Okay, so so we'd say, give me the red block, so red and block. Okay, then the understanding object function. What do you use to brush your hair? And then you'd have a couple of objects out or pictures out to make it a little bit easier. So it's interesting what you do with an item. I often ask this, and a lot of kids go, and they might have some of the basics. If I have a toothbrush, they definitely have it, because there's a lot of repetition with that, yeah? Understanding some opposites, but not all. So your basic ones like stop and go, wet and dry, happy and sad, okay? And then they understand all body parts. We're talking eyebrow, chin, elbow, wrist, toe. So that's really important because it's interesting how we sometimes forget to teach that, and once it comes across, we go, oh, quickly, we have to teach that, because we don't often know, but we have to go in that much detail. And then the less common vocabulary, like violin, caterpillar, hot air balloon, so a lot more complex words that they start to understand that. And then descriptive ones like hairy and smelly and empty, okay? So not just big and little, we're getting more complex. Okay, and then at age 4 to 5, they need to identify 3 to 4 colours, not all, but just your basic, yeah? Show me red, show me green, show me purple. They need to identify simple shapes like circle and square and triangle, yeah? Because that's all the pre-readiness stuff. And you know, there's a lot of articles on nowadays about kids in Ireland going to school too early. Because I think from a language perspective, they're not really ready. They're really only ready at 5 once they've done this. Because if you think in the curriculum, how much of these concepts are in there. So paying attention to stories, answer simple questions about it, because that's junior infants is all about that. Okay, answering complex 2-part questions. Okay. So, what did you buy when you went to the shop yesterday? Okay, really complex one. Continuing to understand more and more words, and they can follow longer instructions, and then they understand those position words like on top, in, out, under, next to. Okay, show me the one under. So they're able to show it to you. Understand the time of day, like morning, nighttime, afternoon. And then if you're concerned about your child's understanding, again, really go to write those down, because it happens in the moment and you're like, oh, this is a perfect example of when they couldn't understand it. So, for example, if you said, Joseph, turn off the telly and wash your hands for tea, then Joseph turns off the telly and sits at the dinner table, but he's forgotten that he's supposed to wash his hands. Okay? So depending on Joseph's age, if he's 2, I'd go, okay, that's fine. But if we're talking about a 4-year-old, he needs to be able to do that. Yeah? What if it's your child's ignoring you? You call him, you ask him to do things. Now, partly, all kids will ignore you a little bit. If they're really occupied, no typical kid will listen to you all the time. They've been replaced by some kind of alien kid because there's no way. All kids kind of zone out a little bit at times. But if they ignore you all the time, I have a lot of parents who say to me, I call them and they just don't respond. And they don't call back. That's the main thing, we know that. So we need to just really make sure there are no hearing problems. It's, if you have, for example, that kind of fluid in the middle ear that I was talking about earlier, the fancy name for it is otitis media with effusion, which is quite OME. 2/3 of those speech sound disorders are caused by OME, right? Because so many kids have that. Because when you might not have ear infection, but when you have a cold, or sometimes when kids are teething, that fluid kind of fluctuates. So it drains, it's not a blue ear, okay? But it drains in and out of the middle ear. And what happens is, that's the difference between whether you heard a f or a s. So one time it can land like foot, next time it sounds like soot, next time it sounds but if it doesn't sound the same way every time, how are you going to have the confidence to try and say words? So it's a little bit like you're underwater. And you can hear, but you don't hear. So it's all within typical limits, hearing-wise, but it does cause speech delays because you don't hear it the same way every time. Listening and attention difficulties do happen, and we know that kids with ADHD don't really get diagnosed until they're about 7, but you can see the signs very early on. And they're very impulsive, really hard time paying attention and listening, and the only time they really pay attention is in very motivating tasks. Doesn't mean they can't ever pay attention, they just need something motivating. Working memory, sometimes kids have a hard time holding to what you've said to them and processing it, working out what you just said, like just being asked to do something. so that you could hear it, work with it, okay, first do this, then this, okay, and then I'll go and do it. And for some kids who have working memory difficulties, it'll go in one ear, out the other really, because they can hear you, but they can't hold it for long enough to work with it. And there are things we can do around helping that, but sometimes that's something that is hard to detect. Sorry?
That is, it is only for the till 5, or it just keeps going?
Working memory can last a long time. You sometimes have to, if it doesn't improve after the first early years, it's important to put in the supports in place in school, so that you have a lot more visuals, so that when you teach them different ways to help remember what they're supposed to do, or when you give, you help them figure out, do they need to draw a picture to help them remember what was said. So you teach them strategies. Because if you think about adults, we all know somebody who doesn't great memory.
They are counting, and this is the thing, step by step.
Yeah.
But while they do, it's all skip the steps, all ignores that.
Yeah, it's for very young children, they will forget what it is, and that's okay. But for older kids, we need to teach them, how do you find ways to help remember? We find different ways. We write things down, we take some notes, right? Or we draw a picture to help us remember it, or we might repeat it over and over again. This and this and this, okay? If we think about somebody giving us a mobile number to remember, what do we do to remember that mobile number? Usually, we say, ring me. That's the lazy way now, isn't it? Yeah. Do the lazy way. The old way was repeat until you can write it down. Yes? And then we usually forget something, because that's a long list of digits to remember, right? Now, another thing is that there can be that receptive language delay, so that delay in understanding. And that's when a kid is ignoring you, because they don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't understand. And that sometimes makes a difference. Also, sometimes with language problems, we need to be careful about vision. I had a little kid with me the other day, one of twins, and she went for a check, and she really had quite a significant visual loss. So she's wearing glasses now. So when I tested her with picture items, she's 2, right? She didn't do too well. But also in her learning, she disengaged with things that are visual, because she didn't really notice it. And now she's gotten used to her glasses, we're seeing a lot more. And there are other things too there as well. Her understanding was delayed, but we're seeing a nice little boost of development, which is fantastic. And if her twin can give an opportunity to speak, she really does do very well. It's a bit about one-on-one attention. That's hard in twins. There's always one that talks a lot, and one is like, oh man, that one always takes things off me, and I'll wait until I get my one-on-one chat. With expressive language, now we're talking about talking. So ages 2 to 3, right? They need to use 50 to 450 words. So 50 more at age 2-ish. And then 3, they need around 450. See that big boost in vocabulary, expressive vocabulary. So that is why, at that point, they're able to put words together in short phrases, like mummy, juice, daddy, work, or daddy, car, because he wants to go to shop for. So that's why there's such a difference. It's because at 2, you don't have a huge amount, but at 3, you've had quite a big leap. And that's why when we see our 3-year-olds and they only have 2 or 3 words, big red flag that we need to look into that. They request items by name. So they'll ask for juice, they'll ask for biscuits, they'll ask to have their favourite cartoon, yeah, and their favourite people. And a lot of kids nowadays asking for Paw Patrol and all those things, right? And then they can name common pictures. So if you show them a picture in a book, or you show them they can name what they are, right? They can ask where and what questions. Like, oh, what's that? Oh, where's Daddy? Where are we going? Those kind of things. They can do like a negative sentence, like no want, no bed. the emotional development, oh, I don't want to do that. So they're starting to combine those and putting the negative in there too. 2 to 4 word phrases, so 2 word phrases a 2. So usually general rule of thumb, 1 year, 1 word, 2 years, 2 words, 3 years, 3 words, 4 words at least. Okay, so that's kind of a rule of thumb. So at the more kind of the 3-year-old part of the spectrum, they're going to start going, me one cookie, I build car. Okay, but the 2-year-old, it's really advanced, they might do that, but you see it more with the 3s. They're going to use something, they're going to go in car, okay, on top. Yeah, they're going to start using those. And they're going to use those regular past tense like I walked. And then they might use some irregular ones like went or bought or through. Yeah. Or they might use some regular plurals like books or more than one, or dogs. But sometimes if they can't say an S, they can't do plurals, just can't pronounce it. So that's, they usually fail the language tests at those levels as well, which is a pity. And then they use more pronouns like him and you. They might not always use it correctly, okay, but the same way they can redo it. And then at 3 to 4, they use sentences of 4 to 5 words, a vocabulary of 800 to 1,500 plus, okay? They're really rocketing through that language. And that's why sometimes for kids when they're having difficulty, that catch-up part is really hard. Because they're all rocketing at such a speed. They name at least one colour correctly. So we're not talking about identifying, we're talking about naming it. Okay? Even if they say it wrong, if it's red for red, that counts. They can tell a simple story about what happened, where they went. They went to Granny's and we fell and this happened, or I went on the swing in the park. Really simple story. Asking and answering questions, that happens a lot. This is also a stage where they ask why, quite a bit. We're going to do this. Why? Because of this. Why? Okay. It's lovely. You always want your kid to talk and then they get to the why stage and you're like, yes, that's exactly what I was asking myself. Their grammar improves. There's still some mistakes, right? But that's okay. Like I go'd to school, yeah? Or I go to stool, which we had in our house. And I'm like, oh, the teacher's going to think I'm a terrible speech therapist. Quickly, let's fix that. And then use is, are, am. I am. They are, yeah. Regular plurals consistently, use plurals all the time, and that's the girl's dress, that's the boy's socks. I use that possessive. And using future tense verbs like will, go, those kind of things as well. So, when we get to the 4 to 5s, they have an expressive vocabulary of 900 to 2,000 plus words. Use sentences of 4 to 8 words. Use nearly grammatically correct sentences. Okay, so almost like a grown-up. We're able to put that grammar together. And then they use those possessive and reflexive pronouns. So we're thinking about myself, themselves. So they sound like tiny little philosophers at this age. They can count to 10 by rote. Go through it, no problem. And they can tell you a story. I can tell you what the stories of the 3 little pigs. That might have a little bit of detail missing, but I can give you a fair idea. So again, if you're concerned, really write it down exactly as they say it. Okay? So, mommy, I go to the toilet, no want dinner, him's hitting me. Those pronouns are really hard. He, she, him, her. A lot of kids have huge difficulties with it. Because back in the day, we had it easy. Boys looked a certain way, they had short hair, wore trousers. Girls wore dresses and had long hair, mostly. Not so easy anymore to distinguish.